Welcome all to the Legislative Land Use and Housing Update on behalf of the League of Cities and Towns and APAUtah. We understand we have, I don't know, we've got maybe 20 people in the room here. And Carson tells us, 130 online? Something like that? 112. Well, overestimated, but yeah, that'll be great. So there were many bills in this legislative session. And so and some of the bills had many things in them. So there's going to be a lot to talk about. We will likely not be able to get into the nitty gritty and the detail on a lot of these bills as many of you may want or desire. But we'll at least make you aware of the bills and at least some of the basics that are in them. And then look for other opportunities or your own ability to work your way through these bills and see what it says, what you need to do. On the planner side, my intent is always to try and help the planners understand what it is they need to be doing now since the legislative session ended and what all of these bills now are going to require them to do. The list is long. And the detail on some of these is really extensive. So look for other opportunities and sessions. For example, I'll be down in St. George tomorrow. The Utah Land Use Institute will be holding a conference down there. We'll be doing a legislative update there again. Carson will be on that panel. A couple of other people will be as well. But that one, again, we won't be getting into a real lot of detail. I think the meeting where there will be a lot more detail will be the APA Utah Spring Conference in Logan. May 6th or 7th through 9th, I believe. So the league is helping to host a couple of sessions there where there will be discussion about the nitty-gritty details of a lot of the bills. And then we'll be doing another legislative update, which we'll go over and do some of that as well. So that's kind of an introduction to where we're at. We will have a number of people here, myself from APA, league staff, that will be here to give you the details on the bills that passed the session that dealt with land use and housing. Just from my own statistics, and I'll give you an indication of this as we do some of the other updates. There were, I counted 30 bills that I was tracking that were related to land use and to housing. 25 of them passed. So that's a lot. And some of these bills were really long and had a lot of detail in them. House Bill 368 in particular, we kind of call it the omnibus bill at this point because it had almost everything that the Land Use Task Force had talked about during the previous year is in that bill. I kind of gauge what's happening with how much the LUDMA, the Land Use Development and Management Act, grows. That's a lot. But not only did the LUDMA grow, but I counted something on the order of 10 or 12 other titles in the state.
Perfect. Thank you for your patience, folks online. This is why we always carry multiple microphones wherever we go. And I'm grateful to our AV team who are younger than me who were able to figure this out. Okay. We'll set us up, and then I'm going to give you a few other key data points because I do think it's important to just have context of what happened before we get into the nitty-gritty. I mentioned this a second ago, but the folks online may not have heard it. We welcome your comments and questions. We will put together an FAQ based on your questions here that will accompany the white papers and the materials that we are still putting together for you this spring. So by all means, speak up. We do have a lot to get through, but we also want to make sure it's worthwhile for you. This is a link to get to the bill tracker because, as Will pointed out, there were 30 bills in the land use space, only 25 of which have passed, but we actually worked on a significantly larger number of bills. We have additional spring training opportunities for you. And then our objective is to give you an update on those bills. But it's also, this is important, to get your thoughts about next year. I hate saying that on March 26th. The session ended less than 3 weeks ago. But to give you some context for why I say that, Yesterday, I was in a 4.5 hour meeting with a bunch of stakeholders on housing and land use, where the whole purpose of the meeting was to start talking about the 2026 legislative session, regulatory reform of local land use. 4.5 hours. So the very force, the session never really ends. They just stop making new laws for a few months, and then we start working toward the next few months. So we'll give you his math and his numbers from the session. Now I'm about to ruin your day. There were 959 bills introduced. So quick show of hands, how many of you woke up in mid-January? This is the snippy part I said I wasn't going to do it, I'm going to do it anyway. How many of you woke up in mid-January and said, I need 959 more state laws? Okay, we all won. Yeah, exactly. Well, our team got a hold of some data from Ledge Research where it felt like a historic rush to us. And it's felt like this the last few years, but now we've got numbers to prove it. This past year was 134 bills higher than the previous 9-year average. Okay. Just because a bill is introduced doesn't mean it stays that way. There were 1,110 substitutes and amendments adopted. That does not include the litany of substitutes and amendments that were not adopted, or that in many cases we fought off. That's just what was adopted. Okay, so you think about what the league staff and the league team does, reviewing all the bills, reviewing all the substitutes and amendments. We tracked 279 bills. So Wolf referenced 40 in the land use space. Well, boy, if we were only tracking 40 bills, that would be a nice, quiet session. Because all told, we tracked 279 bills that impacted local governments in some form or fashion, and then 582 passed. Silver lining, that's 9 fewer than last year. Less of a silver lining, second highest total ever after last year. Lest you think we're just pulling these numbers out of the sky, here's that analysis looking back to 2016. I started the league back in 2006, and part of my job back then was to track the bills and prepare summaries. And I went back just a couple of days ago to look at how many bills there were in 2006 and 2007, and it was below 800. And then of that, we were tracking a much smaller percentage. So the overall number of bills has increased. And then the overall number of bills that impact cities and towns have increased. And there are a variety of reasons for that. That includes the fact that we're just a faster growing state now than we were, even though 2006, 2007, we were starting to accelerate. The challenges we face is number 3 years again. 2019 and the drop a little bit in the last few years have been right up there in terms of record numbers of bills. At the time, is the legislature going to slow down? Cities feel by just the sheer number of bills that are coming, and start brainstorming like how do we stem that tide when everyone the audio's back. Great. All right, well, welcome back online folks. There's a question in the room while you guys were gone of is it going to slow down or not? And Governor Cox has certainly called on the legislature to slow down. Legislative leadership has been saying we can't stop our members from exercising the rights that they have as elected officials, and they're responding to issues that constituents have brought to them. So expectation is it's not going to slow down. Than it was a decade ago. When it becomes really difficult to kill that bill. And that is different from when I started the legislature. When I started the legislature, there were a lot more fights and fair fights where bad bills would die. That is less the case. So 90% of bills this year They only held 10% of them. And then once they went for a floor vote, only 2.5% of them failed on House or Senate. But the bills that didn't pass often did pass because they failed procedurally. The bills that failed procedurally, bills. So if we only got it procedurally, back next year. And the last thing that is we worked diligently this session to try to gather as much feedback from league members during the session as possible. So, for example, in Slido, which we use during our LPC meetings, in Slido, I asked 38 LPC questions, and we had quite a few questions each week. You can see over 5,000 data points. We read every one of those, and then we would summarize the feedback, share with the league officers, and major props and shout out to the Draper Mayor, Troy Walker, Davenport Councilmember Kate Bradshaw, Santa Clara Councilmember Krista Hinton, Mayor Michelle Patrizzi, and Spanish Fork City Manager Seth Perrins. Those are the officers this year of the League of Cities and Towns. So really great staff. We meet with the officers several times a week in between LPC meetings to review the feedback that we've gotten from LPC. And then we did this quick question where we do surveys through our nightly emails and Friday facts to gather additional information in between LPC meetings. You can see almost 800 responses there. And that was incredibly important for us in our prioritization efforts to know if this is what we're focused on, here we're concerned about it, or this is the bill that we can get to yes on, and here's how we can get to yes. So phase 2 gets underway in April. Phase 2, what we explained to the board on Monday is putting the meat on the bones of phase 1. The state housing plan has a steering committee, includes a former league president, and includes a technical committee, which includes league staff and other local government representatives. We anticipate that there will likely be work groups like there have been the last few summers related to the state housing plan and the Commission on Housing Affordability. But all of that is still up in the air, so stay tuned. The last few years, we've had a tremendous amount of interim work groups through the Commission on Housing Affordability. I spoke with the co-chairs last week. They intend to get the commission up and running again by May. So at some point, probably end of April, early May. So April will be really the organizing month to figure out all the different subgroups and meetings. And what our board directed us to do on Monday was make sure that we have league representation on whatever subgroups come out. And Norm's in the room from Santaquin. I want to thank Norm. He's one of those league reps that I referenced in a related group that Envision Utah is spearheading on behalf of the governor's office around infrastructure capacity, around housing. So they're, again, you know, the session ended 2.5 weeks ago, and part of today's session, well, the key focus of today's session is what happened. It's also important for you to recognize what's still going on. We'll have more information in upcoming Friday facts about the state housing plan phase 2 and how you can get involved there. Meanwhile, the session ended on a Friday, and the Desert News headline the following Saturday morning was, did the legislature do enough for housing affordability in Utah? And then the second headline here is from the Select Tribune a few days ago. And we provided a lot of information to both of these reporters to talk about the volume of bills this year and how they can address housing affordability on top of everything that's been passed in the last few years and the collective aggregate efforts. So real quick, the bills that failed but will come back. Now that I told you that bills that failed become the interim discussion for next year, bills that failed that will come back. SB 337 was the bill that came out the last couple of weeks of the legislative session. And you can see where it started was essentially a creation of state community or significant community impact projects that the state could designate anywhere in the state without local consent, without the city or county land use authorities' approval. Where it ended was local consent. And then we were anticipating a second substitute that was going to be more focused in the partnership space between local governments and the state of Utah, but that second substitute never went public. We expect this one will come back. House Bill 540. 2 years ago, the legislature created a path in unincorporated counties for the creation of what are called preliminary municipalities, and they're capped at 3 statewide. A couple have already been underway. This was an effort to rein those back, did not pass, but we anticipate in the interim discussion around the future of these preliminary municipalities. House Bill 88. This bill would have allowed ADUs by right in all cities in urban counties. The bill did not pass, but we know that ADU policy will be front and center within the state housing plan. Our opposition to this bill was focused on the preemption of local land use authority. House Bill 90, 2 main components of where this bill started. 1, allow small lots by right. 2, allow housing by right in all commercial zones. ADUs, housing by right commercial zones, and small lots have all been enacted in several other states as by right state mandates that preempt local land use authority. Here, the legislature was very responsive to our concerns around preemption and saying that cities were working to implement bills that already passed, and we urge the legislature to respect our role of planning and zoning. And ultimately, House Bill 88 and House Bill 90 were 2 of the really small number of bills that did not pass out of committee. They were in that 10% of bills that did not pass out of committee. And then SB 152 is another bill that did not pass. And this bill would have preempted all garage requirements in cities everywhere. Again, this bill did not get out of committee. We fought it there because of the preemption. And instead, SB 181 did pass. And I'll talk about that one here in a moment. House Bill 533 did not pass, but we already know it's on an interim list. And it's around creating a new county within a county of 1 million folks. So if you are in Salt Lake County, you should keep an eye on this concept, because we anticipate some big interim discussions over whether or not Salt Lake County should divide. Okay, let's jump into the bills that did pass. Wilf, I'll let you come back up. I think I haven't looked at the chat room here for a second, but looks like people can hear me now. So let's see if they can hear you. I'll let you hit annexation boundary lines, and I'll come back to start working through that list on the left.
All right, I'll just quickly hit these couple of bills. I've been heavily involved in the annexation stuff for the last several years. Many of you know, and if you've heard me talk about this at all, the annexation code was a mess. It was a mess. That's just really all you can say about it. And it really needed a lot of work. We put together a working group a couple of years ago that actually started work on it. We ultimately decided not to make any major policy changes in it, but just get the code worked around so that it was, so that you could read it. Thanks, Sherry, for saying that. You could essentially read it and kind of understand it. So the provisions that were in this bill in House Bill 368 just reorganized the code, put it in a more logical sense, got rid of some of the conflicting provisions. One major policy change that did occur in this bill is that it took out the separate track for annexations in Salt Lake County. Salt Lake County had a separate process because of some bloody, awful annexation wars that took place there in the 90s. And those stuck around in the code for a long time after that. We talked to the folks in Salt Lake County. Those issues have been more or less resolved in Salt Lake County. Everybody thought it was all right to just go back to the annexation process as it existed for the rest of the state. So that's the one major change in there. But otherwise, pretty much the annexation process is as you understood it to be. It just is easier to read in the state code now. We will likely take a look at, because annexation can be a good tool for managing growth, because that's how communities get bigger. One of the ways, and we are not taking advantage of that here in the state of Utah. A number of other states are, and are doing some proactive things with it. Our working group wants to get back together and start talking about those things. We're hopeful that we'll start doing that maybe here during this coming year, but we shall see. The other bill on the boundary lines, that was what it relates to is changing property lines between parcels of property or lots, when property owners generally agree that they want to adjust the property line between them. But if it's lots lots in a subdivision that may sometimes require a subdivision plat amendment. Or on parcels, there are the recording issues and a number of other things, easements and other things that deal with that. Surveyors who've been involved, of course, in plotting these out for the property owners, they took a big interest in this issue, and they actually worked for this last year and crafted a bill that redefines, resets that whole process for adjusting property lines between properties. It's pretty detailed. The bill is long. I did run it by a couple of planners, asked a few to take a look at it, and I thought I would get a response back from them that said essentially something like, wow, this is a lot of stuff to have to kind of deal with and go through and make sure we're doing correctly. But by and large, the response I got back was, hey, this is good. We think we like this because it puts it into a more orderly process and sets out some clear expectations. So I did talk to the surveyors, or I understood from the surveyors that they had a training session on this a week or two ago for surveyors and others who were interested. That training session went for 2 hours. They said it easily could have gone for 3 hours based on all the questions that were being asked. So it's not something that you're going to get the meat and potatoes of in a quick process. Rob Terry in the property rights office is putting together a little seminar right now to go over just this bill specifically and what it will require. And if you, of course, have processes in your local codes for how to deal with adjustments of property lines, you'll have to adjust that based on what this bill says. And so that means you're ultimately going to have to understand that, which means going to some kind of a workshop probably, or getting somebody who understands this a little bit. Any questions? I guess I ought to ask that question. Any questions on any of these? Not seeing any. Oh, not seeing anything. Okay. And Carson, I'm assuming nothing online. Okay. Cam?
Perfect. And the good news is, Wolf, everybody could hear you. Let's see if they can continue to hear me. And thank you to the league staff that was working on it. Apparently, we've got an AV issue in the room that's separate from our equipment that they've figured out. We should be good to go now going forward. Okay, let's keep moving here. So let's talk about the next two bills, SB 262 and SB 181. These were both bills by Senator Lincoln Fillmore. Both bills had their origins in the Commission on Housing Affordability last summer. Both changed a lot during the session. With SB 262, the initial version of this bill, when it went public, would have required general plans to be adopted, quote unquote, by ordinance. And the intent here really was to try to make general plans be more binding rather than aspirational. That was the intent. That's not necessarily what the language would have done, but that was the intent. Likewise, it had an optional density overlay that was similar to the original version of House Bill 37. That's where it started. I'm going to focus now on where it ended, because we pushed back particularly on the binding general plan concept. And Senator Fillmore, to his credit, acknowledged our points and backed away from that piece, though he still wants to talk about it at the Commission on Housing Affordability this year. So it ended with a change to the HOPS, which was a financing tool from last year. It created a term of art called a consent agreement. Now that is a new term, okay? It's a new term, and the idea here was to try to solve a problem around litigation being able to be resolved by the city council rather than going back to the Board of Adjustment. So if you were to Google this term or search for it in existing code, you're not going to find it, because there's a new term that we created to try to empower city councils. The third piece is a county-only provision. It only applies to the County Land Use Development and Management Act, not the Municipal Land Use Development and Management Act. So if you're a county, you need to look closely at that language around vesting. Then it also creates a shared equity mortgage program for new buyers. So that's more of an FYI for planners. SB 181 was Senator Fillmore's second housing bill from the Commission on Housing Affordability. And this one was the bill that was focused on parking and garages. The original version of this bill had some really concerning provisions for us. In particular, saying that you couldn't require garages under any circumstances, and it would have limited the ability of a city to regulate where a garage goes or where a parking spot goes on a residential lot. It also said you couldn't require garages and additional parking in development agreements. Okay, so that's where it started. And then you can see the size standards, but that's not where it ended up. Where it ended up is it does not apply statewide. It just applies to cities that are moderate income housing plan cities. The parking space size of 9 by 20 for uncovered and 10 by 20 for covered, that is now a state standard. So if you are a city that, well, I mean, all cities have parking requirements, but for single family, two family, and townhomes, the new state standard is a maximum of 9 by 20 for uncovered and 10 by 20 for covered. Now, we did a bunch of research in November and December into ordinances that cities currently have and found that a strong majority of cities were already in this space. So part of our calculation here was that we were trying to codify that best practice that the vast majority of cities were already doing. And then it addressed Senator Fillmore's concern of wanting to have a state standard around the definition of parking stall. Now, the bill in its final form was silent about parking minimums. From a planning perspective, that was a line in the sand for us, as we did not want the state dictating the number of parking stalls, because every neighborhood and every area looks different, and you need that flexibility for planning. So the bill creates that standard definition, requires tandem spots to be counted as two, so long as they're unobstructed. And that was another key piece here, is that you actually have to be able to use the garage for cars. And it says a city cannot require the garage under certain circumstances. So remember, the original version of the bill was you cannot require a garage under any circumstances. Now you cannot require a garage under certain circumstances. And those certain circumstances are if the unit is owner occupied for at least 5 years and affordable at 80% AMI. And to answer the questions that come up a few times in the chat room, yes, these slides will be sent out as part of our follow-up in Friday Facts. But the idea here was that if a builder was willing to ensure that a unit would be owner occupied and affordable, that we in turn would be willing to kind of accept a unit that doesn't have a garage and the inevitable impacts that would have with parking spillover on the street or code enforcement or other things. So it was let's meet in the middle here to truly get to affordable home ownership. So we'll be very curious to see how that plays out. And as you are interacting with property owners in your city, please let us know if builders are working toward this incentive of no garage in exchange for the affordable home ownership. Let me stop there around these two Senator Fillmore bills that came out of the Commission on Housing Affordability, see if there are any questions online or in the room. Yep, go ahead. Let's wait for, should we wait for Mike? You know what? This mic I know works right now, so just tell me and I'll repeat it. Oh, what does unobstructed mean? Thank you very much. I lost several hours of my life on a Friday afternoon trying to figure this definition out. Mayor Walker was with me in that meeting, along with a few others. So I'm half kidding about that, but it was several hours where we were literally all drawing and pointing out to the development community that if they built a tandem garage, and we showed them examples of where cities that had tandem garages built that couldn't accommodate cars, saying like that shouldn't count. So ultimately, I don't have the kind of the final language in there, but we settled on the term unobstructed because we were trying to get to the spirit of this spot accommodates a car. And it can't accommodate a car if there's something permanent fixed in that space. So the example, I'll give you the two examples that we used, two of several. One is if you have a staircase that juts into the garage. You can't move a staircase, and you probably shouldn't park on a staircase either. Probably. So we went back and forth of like, do we identify the fixtures or that? But then we talked about a side door. And if a side door opens in or side door opens out, and that you can accommodate the door, you can plan around the door. But once the staircase is fixed there, you're stuck. And once you're stuck, nobody's going to park there. If they're not going to park there, they're going to be on your road. And then that creates all the problems on the city side. So yeah, we spent several hours going back and forth trying to get to that piece. We ended up on that term. And again, that's why we're curious to see how it plays out in practice. I see comments. Okay, so there's a question in the room here of, for no garage, is it only for new homes or existing homes? Yeah, it'd be for new units. The garage, would this be a building permit or a time of recording subdivision? And yeah, Meg, you already answered that one. Great. Okay. Yes, sir.
City on the garage requirement. So is it specific to a 5-year deed and only an 80% AMI? So if you do anything over that or below that, so it's only for that.
Yeah, it's.
So if you go 30-year at 60% AMI, then it's out the door for garage requirements.
Yeah, if you go below that, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so make sure I understand your question correctly. Your question is, if you build a unit and the standard here is 5 years, 80% AMI, 5 years owner occupancy, 80% AMI. And if you as a city say, we want that unit to be 60% AMI, you still can't require a garage because that would be below the 80%. But if a builder says, I want to build these market rate units and they're going to be rental units, you can still require the garage because that would be above the threshold we've set. Great question about which requirements apply where. So, and as we do our FAQ, we'll make sure these points are very clear. The tandem piece is a standalone. Tandem equals 2, period. 2 must be unobstructed, okay? Then the garage sizing standards of 9 by 20 and 10 by 20, those are standalone. And then the third piece of it is the 80% 5-year piece where you cannot require a garage in exchange for affordable home ownership. So thank you. We'll make sure this is clear in the FAQs. All right.
Require cities to allow tandem parking if it's an unobscured space, or could the city still decide we don't want to have tandem spaces?
Yep.
If we do have one, it has to be obscure.
Yeah, great question about whether this requires cities to allow tandem parking spots. And the answer is no, it does not require you to accept tandem spots. But if you do allow tandem spots, then this kicks in that you count them as 2. And again, as we researched this in November and December, what we found is that a strong majority of cities were counting tandems as 2. But we also found a handful of cities that were not. And the argument at the Capitol was 2 spots should equal 2 spots. And if a city was only counting them as 1, or we actually had a couple of cities who were counting them as 0. That was a hard argument for us to make back to at the Capitol of the builders building a garage, but they're not counting the garage toward the parking. Now, we all know that tandem parking is more complicated than side-by-side parking. Like we get that on a planning side, and that's why to us, we felt like we addressed the bigger planning piece by making sure the bill was silent about parking minimums. And there could be a scenario where your city says, tandem just doesn't work for us anymore because we've got these bad examples. There are other cities that say, yeah, we've been able to make tandem work just fine as long as it's planned well holistically. And we wanted to preserve that holistic planning piece. Okay, thank you for the questions. And I'm going to turn it over to Carson to talk about a bill that was not from the Commission on Housing Affordability, but was an interim bill that came through the Political Subdivisions Committee in response to the state housing audit from a couple of years ago. Carson, take it away. And then we'll come back to more Charles. Oh, you know what? Oh yeah, that I talked about already. Okay, it's all yours.
Thanks. I get to talk about everybody's favorite topic, moderate income housing plans. So some good news on this front, though. I know for those of you who are at the fall APA workshops, we talked a lot about moderate income housing plans, trying to figure out what comes next. HB 37 is the answer to that question. So HB 37 started as a overlay for home ownership. It started as Cameron mentioned, in this political subdivisions interim committee bill in response to the housing legislative audit. So it started with the housing overlay, which was voluntary but didn't quite work within MIHP. It had a bunch of different reporting metrics, which would have been cumbersome and I think concerning for many. And then it required regional housing plans to be created by August 2025. Still not exactly sure what that would have looked like. Good news, none of those provisions are in the bill. Instead, we have a affordable homeownership submenu within MIHP. And I know everybody's least favorite thing is changes to MIHP, but this year the changes are more consistency. So I think that's actually a really positive direction. Now, if you don't want to do this homeownership menu, don't worry, it's optional, totally voluntary. We're encouraging people to do it because it gives you some more stability through the next couple of years of moderate income housing plans until the state housing plan kind of takes over. We expect that the state housing plan, we've talked about that a lot. We still don't have any specifics. We know there's a whole list of tactics that it talks about. Right now it's high level, it lists some strategies, but we expect that this phase 2 of the housing plan will kind of provide the direction for local governments to how best to plan for housing going forward. So that's still to be worked out, but part of the goal with this process was to say, let's create a bridge for local governments so that cities aren't spinning their wheels trying to figure out yet another iteration of MIHP every year, but try to give some consistency. So if you do one of these strategies, not only does it count for 3 strategies, so if you're a city that doesn't have transit, you only have to do 3, then you just do one of these. And these strategies in the submenu are a little more objective. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the good news is that you do that, you're good for 3 years, the initial year, this year, and then subsequent years. And I'll again touch on that in a minute. The other piece is that it requires GOPB to develop a state housing plan. Now, you might say, sounds like you've already been talking to GOPB about a state housing plan, and that's true. We have. Phase 1 is underway. And phase 2 is about to start in, well, next week, I guess, 2 weeks. But this is actually the statutory authority to direct GOPB to do it. So we expect a lot of conversations at the legislature this year about the policy behind a state housing plan. That never really materialized, but we did get some direction in this bill to actually officially sanction it. So as I mentioned, the homeownership menu is not required. But the good news is if you're a city who's already looking at doing a HOPS or an HTRZ, the FIZ needed a little bit of work and that's been fixed this year. So good news there. But if you do those or approve a project for the Utah Homes Investment Fund, that was one that was created last year, or one of these homeownership density bonuses, if you do any of those, that gives you that certainty of being able to be automatically qualified as completing MIHP for the next 3 years. Sorry, initial years plus 2 years, 3 years total. So again, I want to talk about these density bonuses a little bit because this was a big piece of this. We recognize that not every city has the capacity to do a housing and transit reinvestment zone. In fact, if you don't have a transit station, you can't really do one. But you could do a FIZ, you could do a HOPS. HOPS are a fairly low barrier. But then the legislature also recognized that these tools don't fit all cities. So we created yet another pathway to get that MIHP automatic compliance. And there's a single family version of the density bonus and a multifamily version of the density bonus. And these are kind of the minimum thresholds. It's really just based on the number of units. There is not a geographic minimum threshold. So it doesn't say you have to do this over a certain number of acres. It just sets the density. Please take that seriously. The legislature gave local governments a lot of latitude here. I could already hear the question of, can I do this for like a 1 acre parcel and qualify for MIHP? Technically, you probably could, but I think that would break some of the spirit of that partnership and that latitude. So if you're looking at doing these, please talk to us and let us know, and we're happy to try to talk through some projects and how that could look like. But as you can see, single family density bonus is, to qualify, you just have to have an area. If it's under 6 units per acre currently, you just have to do 6 or more units per acre. If it's an area that you're already looking at rezoning, and it would be more than, or it's already more than 6 units per acre, it's just half a unit per acre more than the current base zoning. So for some smaller communities who are maybe more rural, this could feel like a stretch. For many probably suburban and urban communities, this probably isn't a huge change. And then there's a multifamily version, which is trying to get to condos. And the only threshold there is the density has to be at least 20 units per acre. So that's probably a little bit more infill development focused than the new growth. Now, in addition to the MIHP compliance, there's some more incentives built in for cities. And these very teeny bit for the single family versus multifamily, but the gist of it is the city may require, it's not mandatory. We recognize, again, not all projects will fit all molds, but you can require deed restrictions for at least 5 years. You can require affordability. Again, it's kind of set at 80% to match the hops and the fizz. And then you can restrict up to at least 25% of the size. So again, and then you can also say, like, if you want the project to be targeting teachers or municipal employees, firefighters, police. Some cities have programs like that already. You can build those in as well. So again, give cities a lot of latitude to work with the private sector to try to figure out how these projects could look. And if you do one of these projects, that gives you that automatic compliance. So again, I mentioned that I keep bringing this back to the state housing plan because we really see this as we don't know what the state housing plan will ultimately end up doing, but we expect that this will become MIHP 3.0 or maybe just eventually replace MIHP. Part of the reason that we built out this submenu with a lot of latitude was to say, here's not only how you qualify for MIHP, but we're expecting those to be topics that will be prioritized within the state housing plan. So the idea being, not only do you get the incentive of MIHP plus the additional affordable housing requirements that you can have, but hopefully it gives you some more certainty in the future as we start to build out the state housing plan and those next set of requirements. So let's see, I see a couple questions on Zoom. Are there any questions in the room about this? Yeah.
Multifamily is 20 units to the acre.
Yep.
Does it qualify if you already have a zone that allows for 20 units to the acre, or do you have to rezone for that density?
So my reading of the bill, I think the original intent was to say that you rezone it for 20 units to the acre, but my reading of the bill is actually just any area that's 20 units to the acre can qualify. So if you already have a project underway that you're looking at, again, I would approach that cautiously, like if a developer already has some entitlements, because you could run into some issues if you start attaching on a bunch of other affordability requirements, but just talk to them and see if they're interested in maybe a little density bonus, or if they're interested in maybe that workforce housing partnership or something like that. But yeah, that would qualify you. Cool.
So Chris, I have one, I'll have you.
Yeah.
answer. What if we're currently working on a project that would meet these requirements, could we still count it in the next year's MIHP?
Yes, in this coming years when you would be reporting it, I think you will need to change your initial plan to be able to do this. This is all a little bit trickier because the Housing and Community Development Office, the state's restructuring a whole bunch of offices, so we don't have a clear point of contact there right now. But that'd be the intent, is you would do it for this next phase. So you might resubmit your initial plan, just saying this is the strategy we're doing. The other piece I want to mention about this submenu, all of these strategies are a little bit more objective, whereas the initial menu, which you can still do, you can still keep your past plans, totally fine. Whereas those past plans are a little bit more about planning towards a goal or planning towards implementing a strategy. These are a little bit more clear, like you approve this, whether it's an HDRZ, a density bonus, hops, you have to actually do that approval. So it's a little bit more objective for both the city, for HCD who'll be reviewing these, and for the private sector. So that is one of the big differences. We recognize these are harder lifts than some of the other strategies, but they also give you that bonus of certainty. All right. If you have any other questions, let me know. We'll keep talking about this through the remaining land use sessions. So I'm going to turn it over to Jared for everybody's favorite Goliath bill, 368.
Okay, so these are all the topics that this bill addresses. And before I begin kind of introducing where this bill ended up with all of these, I want you to be thinking as I'm speaking, what are some of the topics that you feel like would be helpful to go over? Obviously, Wilf has gone over this annexation portion of the bill, but there are also all of these other things that are addressed in this bill that we can go over in depth. But given the time, want to make sure that we hit on those most important things that may be on your mind. So this is the meat and potatoes bill. I would say this took about a year, for some issues, even longer than a year, to negotiate and to get to that language. And so this is a big effort in taking the feedback that we received from you and taking that to the negotiation table and saying, no, that's not going to work, or this is going to work. We can do this, we can tweak that. So that's kind of where we're at on this bill. And I don't know, where do I see the comments so I can see if there are any specific topics addressed? Okay. Anybody in the room that otherwise I'll just start going through each one of these. But if there's a specific area that you'd like more information on, John.
On identical plans, has that been resolved? There were still some questions to what constitutes an identical plan, so you're not charging, an add-on, if you will, plans that are identical. Was that clarified through this bill?
Can you repeat the question, because they can't hear.
Yes. So John asked, there were some questions on what is an identical plan, and during the negotiations, there was back and forth about what would qualify as an identical plan. So I'll just jump right into what that is. The identical plan has to be submitted within the same building code cycle. So it can't be, 20 years ago, we submitted this plan, and we can now, even though the building code has completely changed, we can still use one that was 20 years ago. So it has to be within the same building code cycle. There can't be any structural differences. This is a big key. The floor plan, and let me just clarify, this is just the floor plan. This is not the site plan. This is just the floor plan, that they can use the same floor plan. The building is located on the same land within the same zone that the original plan was submitted under. And does not require any additional engineering or analysis beyond a review to confirm plans are substantially identical. Includes floor plans oriented differently. So if you've got, my understanding is, and I'm not a builder, I'm not a plan reviewer, but my understanding is that some of the energy code requires, if you were to flip a floor plan in a different way, that would require different requirements. Well, if it's the same floor plan and it does not, again, require any structural differences, then those would be considered identical plans. One thing to consider is that we only have 5 business days for all the reviews that need to take place. That includes reviewing the geotech reports. That includes the site plan. That includes, a lot of those things are already done when it comes through the subdivision review process at that time. This is merely for receiving the building permit and receiving that approval for starting the building. In discussing this, we had extensive conversations with the Utah Association of Building Officials. It initially started at 2 days for everything, and we said, well, no, we still can require a site plan review. We can still require that the geotech reports are in, and we can review them. And after discussion with them, they felt like 5 days was enough time. So that's where we got that from the fee for review can't exceed the lesser of the actual cost or 30% of the original fee that could have been charged or was charged for the initial plan that was submitted. The builder requirements, they have to submit a various different details, what the index number was that was given for the original plan, identify the site that the identical plan will be built, the floor plan, mark it as an identical plan, and indicate what zone it will be built in, so that we can compare whether that was in the same zone as was the original plan. The municipality has to file and index the original plan for future reference and provide an applicant with an identifying index number for the original plan. Now, this whole construct of identical plans is actually done in quite a few cities already. So this shouldn't be a novel thing for many different cities. It may be for yours, but that is what is already being done. Now, there is a penalty for a builder if they knowingly and with intent to deceive submit a non-identical plan. The bolded at the bottom says this is not the first, second, third, or fourth option. Because what happens is if this were to happen, and it wouldn't be an egregious situation, that puts us the next year really difficult place to negotiate. And so this would be a threat, but if you're going to impose a penalty, we would encourage you to talk to us first to see if there's any other ways that we can resolve that issue, whatever it may be. So there is this, obviously they hated this idea, but we don't want non-identical plans being submitted either, and having them say that they're identical plans and not have them be identical plans. So that was the purpose behind this, is to motivate them to not take advantage of this.
To guard against the idea of trying to slip in the plan called, could the city just maintain a library of approved plans? And the developer says we're going to do plan 10B, you pull that off the shelf, they don't give you the plan, you've already got it.
Yes, they could, but there's thank you. So the question was, can't the city just keep a folder file of all of the plans that have the initial plans that have been submitted, so that they can just say we want plan X, or we want plan Y, or we want plan. The answer to that is they can, but if there is a substantially identical plan that, say, instead of a bathroom being on the front, a bathroom being on the back, but everything else, and there's no structural differences, they would still be able to do that under this code section as an identical plan. So yes, that's the whole point, is to keep an index of every plan that they want to use as an identical plan. But if a bathroom is instead on this side versus on this side, but there's no structural differences and it doesn't require any additional engineering analysis, then those would be considered identical plans, even though they would be different from the initial plan in a very small way. So, frankly, I think that the biggest users of these are going to be production builders. They build the same, they send in the same plans, say we're going to build this, 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 and this. We've got our cottage, we've got our, whatever, and this is what we're going to build. And so that's where we're at on that. Did I have any other questions?
Yeah, let's take this, does it mean it needs to be approved or denied in that time, or just finding issues to be addressed?
Approved or denied? I need to repeat. Gosh, Meg, I'm sorry. So I can't see.
Yeah, Brandon's asking what defines no, sorry, John, does it need to be approved or denied in that time, or just finding issues to be addressed?
Does it need to be approved or denied during that time, or does it just need to address those issues?
John's question in the chat.
John's question in the chat. So the answer to that is it needs to be approved or denied. The floor plan approved or denied. Again, during the subdivision plan phase of that, you typically would have already looked at the geotech reports, found what's in the subdivision, already have those. The site plan has already been done. This is merely just approving or denying the floor plan outlay. Yes, Norm.
To be clear, this takes away our 14-day period that we have to review a set of plans if it is identical. Am I understanding that correct?
To 5 days, yes.
Sorry, dear.
So the question is this would not be the original 14-day plan review time that we would typically have for any other type of plan that's not an identical plan. Yes, this would take away that 14 days and be 5 days because it's an identical plan.
It may already be in line in the 14-day process.
So the question is whether it would move you ahead in the time frame that aside from other building permit application, and that's correct. It would move you ahead because those things have to be done within the 5 days. Yes.
This includes planning review, site plan,
This
or is it just the floor plan for building?
does it include the site plan or just the floor plan, the building floor plan? The 5 days would include the site plan as well. In talking with Utah Association building officials, they said that this is the site plan typically is already done with subdivision phase.
Not.
So
Okay, well, we'll try to.
we will address that.
Right.
On to the
So the
next one.
planning and zoning review gets done during the building permit process. So the site plan, we review it as they submit that building permit. That's how we all do it.
Okay. We'll look at that and get back to you on that. Let's see. So just moving on to the building permit plan review. This is, unless there's any other specific ones that you want me to advance to.
Just try to go through each of them if we can, because there's questions on most of them.
On most of them, okay. The building permit plan review is I'm just going to go straight to this. Because this is going to set up the explanation of what this plan review time does. In the current code, there is no amount of time that we have to determine whether an application is complete or not. There is no time limit. What that does is it sets up cities to be able to take a month or 2 or 3 or however long they want to complete the plan review for a 1 and 2 family dwelling. And so what we've done is we've tidied that down to a 3-day screening period. My understanding, well, so that's the 3-day screening period. We can pause that as we look at that, so let me just go through each one of them. We determine an application is incomplete within these 3 days. We pause the time period from going forward at all. Period. it pauses it until they get us a complete application. They send in whatever we're looking for. If we determine during the 3-day screening period that the application is complete, that is when the timeline, the day after the screening period, after it's determined that the application is complete, that means that the 14-day period starts. Okay. Say in day 6, we thought that it was complete. We find out that we're missing documents. During this, on day 6 of the 14-day plan review time, that means that because the 3-day screening period has expired and we didn't catch all of the documents that needed to be submitted, and so we have to begin the plan review. We can't just set it aside and wait until we think that everything's in. After those 3 days, we start the plan review of what documents we have at that time. And obviously, we can't review stuff that we haven't been given. So at day 6, if we determine the application is incomplete, we still have to move forward with that plan review after the 3-day screening period has expired. Okay, so in order to address, well, we want time. If they give us the documents that we need late and within the last 5 days of the 14-day time period, there was a notification. If on day 10, within the last 5 days of the 14-day plan review period, it is still incomplete, they still haven't given us the documents that we need, that immediately pauses the time that we have still remaining out of the 14 days to be able to complete the review for the remaining documents. So we have those 3 days at the very beginning to say, pause. We're not continuing until you give us the rest of the documents that we need to review. Let me just finish and then I'll come to your question. So on day 10, if we determine, well, they still haven't given us the documents, we didn't catch it in the 3-day period like we should have. We started the plan review, we're still waiting for documents, and it's day 10. If they haven't given it to us by day 10 or 11 or 12 or 13 or 14, then we get whatever amount of time they took to get it to us in the last 5 days is added on to the end of the 14 days. So if it got to us, if it still was incomplete on day 10, it pauses and adds 5 days to whenever they give us that document, it's 5 days from that point forward. Think of it that way. That's the better way to think of it. Whenever they give it to us, we've got 5 days from that point forward. Now, even if that moves past the 14-day plan review period, we've got 5 days from the time that they give it to us until those 5 days are up. Now I'll go back here to the question.
Just not giving us the document, does there come a point when we can say this application's denied and then go back to the start?
Well, so the question is, Meg, can I just have you stand up here and repeat and parrot? That would probably be quicker. So the question is, what if after day 14, we still have not received the documents that we need and it's taking forever and they haven't, can we tell them that we're done with this application and it goes back to the beginning? It is not addressed in the code, specifically in this code section. I think the intent was that we would receive those documents that we need by the 14 days. And if not the 14 days, then we'll still have the 5 days to review whatever documents they give us after the 14 days. Yes. And again, it's on us to determine one way or another whether we need any other documents within those 3 days. So we've got that 3-day screening period, and then we still have all the way through the 14-day period to say, hey, we need those documents. Hey, we need those documents. And by the end of on the 10th day forward, we add 5 days to whenever we receive the document that we have been asking for.
Say somebody submitted a permit, 180 days goes by, they never respond to anything, that application becomes inactive.
Right.
We void the application.
I don't think we're going to have a problem up with the legislature to explain that situation. We should go to the next one. By the raise of hands, how many of you deal with bonding for public infrastructure improvements? Okay, a few. We'll cover this as well. So, and I will see what I can do on in getting through this. 11 minutes. So we are a lot of cities already do this in relation. So this is bonding for public infrastructure improvements, and the bonding that is required for them to post until they complete it, and we've inspected it, and then the warranty period starts, and we go and inspect it for warranties. So this is what this aspect is talking about, and releases of those bonds as well. So the reason these infrastructure improvement categories are important is because these are the now identified systems that we will need to release upon when those systems are complete. And so I'll come back to this, and it'll make a little bit more sense as we go through the releasing of bonds. We now have 15 days for first through fourth class cities to either accept or reject warranty work after the request. If you're a fifth class or a town, you've got 30 days. The release of the bond, whether it be cash, letter of credit's a little bit unique, escrow, or surety bond, that those aspects are released according to the infrastructure improvement categories that we're talking about here. So the release has to happen within 15 days after the day on which the municipality determines it is complete. If so, then we give them 90% of the assurance allocated toward that improvement. So coming back to this, if say we go and inspect the culinary water system and we've approved it, we have 15 days to give them back the 90% of the assurance, and then obviously we keep 10% for the warranty portion. There's also that 10% of the remaining amount of the bond to cover the administrative costs after the 15 days after the warranty period expires and the municipalities determine it is complete. So those are the timelines by which we have to release in accordance with each of those infrastructure improvement categories. We're not talking about the full bond amount. We're talking about how much bond is allocated toward each of those systems. So in other words, if they have not completed the sanitary sewer system, we're not releasing the bond on everything. We're only releasing it on the culinary water system that we've already gone and approved, and we release that 90% and keep 10% for the warranty, and then after the warranty period is done. This does require that they do include as-built drawings as part of the release of the assurance. It also does include any remaining portion of the administrative costs on that bond that was bonded for as well. If a cash bond is used, the interest accumulated on the amount of cash bond needs to be put into an interest-bearing account. As you know, this was one of the very, this was one that was brought up before the session and during the session. Legislatively, politically, it is a hard argument to make that as we hold their money and that we are making money off of their money sitting in an account, that they shouldn't get that interest on that money. So that was the concept behind that. We recognize that, and they recognize that that may mean that cash bonds, that we no longer use cash bonds. They recognize that and know that. The release of the bond is an administrative act, not a legislative act. Oh, I went backwards. Okay, so the next thing on this bonding is within 15 days, we have to give the builder a comprehensive and specific list of reasons why the municipality rejected public improvements of the warranty work. We've got some municipalities that they've asked, well, why aren't you approving our warranty work? What is wrong with it? We'll go and fix it. And they're not getting this comprehensive and specific list that's already required in the code. If the municipality fails, the applicant can then send written notice demanding that a list be given within the 5 days. And again, if the municipality doesn't respond and give them the comprehensive and specific list, we have to give back a reimbursement equal to 20% of the applicant's improvement completion assurance for the warranty work within each infrastructure improvement category. For me, this is a fairly straightforward concept. If we have an issue with their improvement after warranty, we should let them know why we're not approving that. And if we don't, even after the 5-day notice, then we need. So that was the compromise there. Cannot hold a bond on one project just because of poor performance on another project. They are independent of each other. No bonds may be required before submission of and for the purpose of being a security for a private landscaping plan and on construct first record later projects. So the code currently says either you bond for the public infrastructure or you construct first and take the risk that you're not going to be able to record your plat later because you've got issues. We said, well, there's issues with that because we need to actually make sure that as sewer pipelines go in and things like that, that we have we can inspect that public infrastructure. They said, well, okay, let's also include that the municipality can come and do the inspections and require approval of the final engineering plans as well. So that was the compromise that we made there. Must provide 2 forms of security at all times. And this is more so of a reminder. We've got some, I just pulled up yesterday or a few days ago where this is the language in their code that they can have a cash or irrevocable letter of credit, but the mayor can, in his or her discretion, waive or modify performance bond requirements, including if it's, hey, you can only give us cash or you can only give us a letter of credit. And then it identifies you have to use cash if this, or you have to use some other form if this. we always have to provide them 2 forms of security that they can use. In whatever circumstance, it always has to be at least 2.
One question, we'll go to noticing, because then we're gonna switch over back to Cameron.
Okay.
If already have cash bonds, do we only have to give the interest that accumulated after the bill went into effect? This is Carla's question online.
This is Norm's question too. You're amazing. You should be throwing tomatoes at me. So Carla's question online is, do we have to reimburse the interest that has been accruing on bonds that have already been posted prior to the enactment of the legislation? And the answer to that is not found within the code. What I would recommend is that any new bonds that have been issued, that those be tracked. I think that is what it's whenever bonds are used, that we track that. It is not in the code as to one way or another. So we may need to, this may need to go back and look at that. But I think right now, I think the most important thing is that be held in an interest-bearing account, and if that interest is used on any future bonds, that we keep track of that and give that back. So, Cameron. Oh, land use noticing. Sorry. So land use, yeah, a win. So as many of you know, land use noticing requirements from prior years has made it so that when we notice, it costs a lot of money, especially even if it's a response to state law requirements saying, hey, you need to do this. Well, now we need to change our land use regulations, and now it requires us to send out notice. What this does is, if it's the term that we use is ministerial in nature, then the noticing changes from a Class B to a Class A notice. And so what you'll want to do is check your ordinances to make sure that these now comply. And what is ministerial? It is bringing the municipality's land use ordinances into compliance with the state or federal law. It's adopting a municipal land use update that affects an entire zoning district or multiple zoning districts. It's those clerical text amendments to an existing land use ordinance, recodifying the municipality's existing land use ordinances, combination of all of those, designating or defining an affected area for purposes of boundary adjustment or annexation. One we heard of was $5,000 just to identify, send out notice to identify what their affected area was. So we feel like this is a very good change. It should have happened. So anyways, that's where we ended up with that. I don't know where.
Thank you, Jared. I recognize that one clock in this room says 1:28. One clock in this room says 1:26. And the clock on my phone says 1:32. Yeah, and John Hiskey's nodding his head about the 1:32 one. Okay, got it. Message received. I'm going to just wrap us up in a couple of minutes. We're not going to hit every bill that's over here, but keep in mind we will send out this PowerPoint, and we'll record a few other little segments about what happened. But I want to emphasize something that Jared just said about the noticing piece being a win. That noticing piece came to us from the Municipal Clerks Association last year during spring training. This language that's up here behind me right now about the change to the land use appeals, this came to us from the city attorneys last spring during spring training. Our appeal to you as planners here, as you're going forward and you're working through implementing what happened this past session, is that if you see items in code you would like to address, let us know so that it can come into our interim work and determine, is this something that has broad consensus among all cities? And is this something we want to bring forward in our discussions? Because as I identified an hour ago when we started, a lot of work happens in the off season. There is not an off season. The closest thing to an off season is the 4th of July. And that's not even off season for cities because you're doing parades, right? So Christmas Day, I don't think I got a work related call on Christmas Day. So there's that, okay? So I'm also going to mention just a couple other things that I view as wins for local governments that came to us from cities. Also in House Bill 368, transfer of development rights. This was an effort to try to make it easier to transfer development rights between jurisdictions. This came to us from local government folks. We'll do a quick snapshot of this in the FAQs about what action is required and what action is not required. I'm going to skip quickly to SB 280. This bill modifies the retail incentives bill from a few years ago. And the definitions here came because of feedback from local government staff saying, we don't know what these terms mean, so we are able to address them here. And one big piece here is number 2. Housing, you can now qualify to use a retail incentive under the path that allows for mixed use if the housing is within a quarter mile of the retail facility. We think that is a good change from a planning perspective, because there was some ambiguity in the old code about did the housing have to actually be connected to the retail facility or on side of the retail facility. So now you can draw a little bigger circle and still have it be part of the center, but not necessarily connected right to that retail facility. Again, that change came from feedback from local government leaders. Another one, House Bill 360, where I'm going to emphasize where it ended, this Legacy City pilot program. This is super exciting. For the first time, there's going to be state dollars available for older cities that have older housing stock to access dollars to facilitate affordable home ownership and to try to get families to buy into those older neighborhoods. Now, it's a pilot program, which means it's limited in scope right now, but we're opening the door. And this was feedback that came to us from the Ogdens and the Salt Lakes of the world, said the legislature is only focused on new development. What about our older neighborhoods? This is an effort to address those older neighborhoods. Another piece here, this is closing a meeting under APAUtah to discuss the financing of political subdivision on land. That came to us from cities saying we want this additional tool to have a closed meeting to talk about land that we own that we would like to develop. That came to us from cities. Now, I also want to emphasize this because of publicly owned land. We had a tremendous amount of discussion last year around facilitating the development of publicly owned land, in particular, UDOT owned land. If your cities, you as planners need to be aware that that conversation is continuing and it's going to get turbocharged. And it's going to be turbocharged around the possibility of using federally owned land in or near your city for housing, using SITLA land in or near your city for housing, using other state-owned land. And I think part of the conversation will be political subdivision-owned land, not as a mandate, but as an option for you. And we'll have more information about that as the summer gets going. So I'm going to skip all the way down, recognizing that we will have these slides available for you. As much as I want to talk about billboards, SB 195 is another tricky one for you as planners as it gets to the transportation side. There were 7 different versions of the bill, and the league position changed 7 times, depending on the version of the bill. So you're lucky we're out of time, so that Carson can't go through each version of the bill, but they're listed here. I'll just skip to where it ended, and where it ended has a focus on Salt Lake City. But I also think what's important for you as planners to know here is there was a lot of discussion around multimodal transportation, active transportation, other types of transportation, and what does that mean for traditional surface transportation? And UDOT will be doing this study focused on Salt Lake, but it could have impacts, I think actually could have positive impacts on other cities around best practices for multimodalism. The other key piece of this is around stationary plans. Remember, if you are a city that has a stationary plan, you need to have that certified by your MPO by the end of 2025. I cannot overemphasize this enough. For you cities that have stationary plans, we are constantly promoting the approach of the state created objectives, but left the flexibility to locals to figure out how to meet those objectives as the gold standard for the partnership between state and local governments. And Farmington, Dave, since you're in the room, like I've got an email yesterday about the North Farmington station and the exciting things that you guys are doing there. And I thought Bringham's comments, I haven't had a chance to follow up with him, but Bringham's comments, your city manager, were phenomenal about the generational opportunity that the city had. And we want to be able to showcase to the legislature the good things that we are doing as cities and how we're planning, so that relieves the pressure from the state to feel like they have to come in and plan Brigham City for you.
Can you back up one slide?
Maybe.
All
this slide?
MPO cities have to do an update to their.
Yeah. Yeah, so Will just pointed out, this is in sub 7. Since you brought it up, I'll just quickly emphasize it. All cities within MPO boundaries have to update your general plan transportation circulation elements to include these pieces. And this started as a conversation around canals and connectivity. And I think one of the key takeaways from this session is legislators and the governor they hear from the public about how the public is frustrated by growth. And the only way to really tackle growth head on is through planning. Well, we're the government responsible for planning. So collectively, we need your help, and this will be part of our conversations later this spring. We need your help to tell our stories to legislators about how we are planning and how the state can partner with us rather than mandate to us. Meanwhile, there's gravel. Okay. Here's our contact information. You heard from Jared, you heard from Carson, you heard from me. I'll come back to that in a second. Which this is just the snapshot of things that turned into bills this year that came out of our spring outreach last year. So please, please, please let us know things you're working on or things you'd be interested for the league to work on. We'll be aggregating all of those to bring back to the league board later this spring. And you can contact us through these email addresses. With that, all clocks are now well past 1:30. So thank you very much for your time. We'll send this out via Friday Fax and through APA. We'll make some tweaks to the slides and do an FAQ for you. So thank you for your service and for your participation.